In March of 1955, Albert Einstein received news that his oldest and closest friend, Michel Besso, had died. They had known each other for more than 50 years. Besso had been the sounding board for the special theory of relativity, the person Einstein talked to in the weeks before the idea crystallized, the only person thanked in the 1905 paper that changed the structure of physics. Besso died on the 15th of March. Einstein wrote to his family within days. His letter contained one sentence that has echoed through physics ever since. Michele has preceded me a little in leaving this strange world. This means nothing. For us believing physicists, the distinction between past, present, and future is only a stubbornly persistent illusion. Einstein was not offering comfort the way a friend offers comfort, with warmth, with the softening language of loss, with the hope that something awaits beyond this life. He was stating what the physics required. The phrase believing physicists did not mean religious belief. It meant believing in the physics, trusting the equations, accepting what they implied even when the implications defied every intuition about time and loss and endings. The physics. Einstein had spent 50 years described the universe in which every moment in time is as real and as permanent as every point in space. The past does not cease to exist when the present moves beyond it. A life, when it is over, does not disappear from the universe. It becomes unreachable. Located at coordinates the present can no longer visit, but no less real for being unreachable. The way a city you left 20 years ago is still there, on the map, at its coordinates, whether or not you will ever return to it. Einstein died 5 weeks after writing that letter. Whatever the physics says about what happened next, the letter remains. And the physics it rests on has not been overturned in the 70 years since. Start with what the physics actually says about time, because it says something that contradicts everything you have experienced. Every fundamental equation in physics is indifferent to the direction of time. Newton's laws of motion work identically forward and backward. Maxwell's equations for electromagnetism are time-symmetric. The Schrödinger equation in quantum mechanics runs the same in both directions. Einstein's field equations of general relativity do not prefer one direction of time over the other. At the deepest level of the mathematics that describes the universe, a level of particles, fields, forces, and space-time geometry, time has no arrow. Run the equations backward and nothing breaks. The physics works just as well with time flowing from future to past as from past to future. Only one law appears to give time a direction, the second law of thermodynamics. Disorder grows. A cup shatters but does not unshatter. A fire burns but does not unburn. But the second law is a statistical law, not a fundamental one. It describes the behavior of large collections of particles, the overwhelming probability that a system will move from an ordered state to a disordered one, because there are vastly more disordered arrangements than ordered ones. At the level of individual particles and fields, every interaction is reversible. Time has no preferred direction in the fundamental physics. The directionality you experience, the absolute, unquestionable feeling that the past is gone and the future has not arrived, is not written into the deep equations of the universe. That is not philosophy. That is what the mathematics says, and it changes what it means for something to be over. In 1905, Einstein published the special theory of relativity and showed that time is not what anyone assumed it was. Two observers moving at different velocities relative to each other do not experience the same passage of time. A clock on a fast-moving spacecraft ticks slower than a clock on the ground, not because the mechanism is affected, not because the clock is broken, but because time itself passes at a different rate for each observer. The slowing is real. It is physical. It is not a measurement error or a perceptual trick. Time is not a river flowing at the same rate for everything in it. Time is elastic, stretched and compressed by velocity, by gravity, by the geometry of the space-time the observer moves through. Confirmation came quickly. In 1971, Joseph Hafele and Richard Keating placed cesium atomic clocks on commercial aircraft and flew them around the world, eastward and westward. then compared them to identical clocks that remained at the United States Naval Observatory. The clocks disagreed. The eastward flying clocks, which moved faster relative to the Earth's surface, had ticked fewer times than the stationary clocks. The westward flying clocks, which moved slower relative to the rotating Earth, had ticked more. The differences were small, nanoseconds, but they matched Einstein's predictions precisely. Time passed at a measurably different rate for clocks that moved through space at different velocities. Nanoseconds seem trivial. They are not. The principle they confirm has no lower limit. Your body in a chair is aging at a fractionally different rate than a body on the floor above you, because gravity varies with distance from the Earth's center. At the scale of a building, the difference is immeasurable. At the scale of a satellite orbit, it is significant enough to break GPS. At the scale of a black hole, it is dramatic enough to stop time. The principle is the same at every scale. Time is not universal. It is a dimension of the geometry, and the geometry varies from place to place and from velocity to velocity. GPS satellites confirm this every second of every day. The atomic clocks aboard GPS satellites orbit at roughly 14,000 kilometers per hour and sit at an altitude where gravity is weaker than at the Earth's surface. Both effects, velocity and gravitational field strength, alter the rate at which time passes. The velocity effect slows the satellite clocks relative to ground clocks. The gravitational effect speeds them up because weaker gravity means faster time. The two effects do not cancel. Without relativistic corrections, corrections derived directly from Einstein's equations, GPS position calculations would drift by roughly 10 kilometers per day. The system that tells you where you are on Earth works only because the engineers who built it accounted for the fact that time runs at a different rate in orbit than it does on the ground. Relativity is not a theory awaiting confirmation. It is confirmed every time you use a map on your phone. That fact, that time is physical, that it bends, that it runs at different rates in different conditions, is the foundation for everything that follows. And what follows changes what it means for something to be over. Follow the implication. If time passes at different rates for different observers, if there is no single universal clock that everyone agrees on, then time is not a flowing river carrying everything from past to future. Time is a dimension. It is a coordinate, like the three spatial coordinates that specify where something is located. Events do not happen and then vanish into a gone past. Events exist at specific coordinates in a four-dimensional structure, 3 dimensions of space plus 1 dimension of time, that physicists call spacetime. General relativity makes this explicit. Einstein's field equations describe the universe as a four-dimensional geometric object, a manifold in which matter and energy curve the geometry, and the geometry determines how matter and energy move. In this framework, your birth is not an event that happened and disappeared. It exists at specific coordinates in spacetime, a particular location in space, a particular location in time, as real and as fixed as any other point in the four-dimensional structure. Your 10th birthday exists at its coordinates. Every conversation you have ever had exists at its coordinates. Every person you have ever loved exists at the coordinates where they were. At every moment they were alive, at every location they occupied, as permanently as any feature of the geometry. Hermann Weyl, one of the great mathematical physicists of the 20th century, described it with precision that has never been improved. The objective world simply is. It does not happen. Only to the gaze of my consciousness, crawling along the lifeline of my body, does a section of the world come to life as a fleeting image in space which continuously changes in time. Weyl's point is stark. The world does not happen. It simply is. The happening, the sense of events arriving and departing, of the present sliding forward along the time dimension, of the past receding and the future approaching, is what consciousness does as it moves through a structure that is itself static and complete. This is called the block universe, or eternalism. It is the most natural reading of general relativity, the interpretation that takes the geometry at face value without adding extra assumptions about which slice of the four-dimensional structure is the real one. Most physicists working in relativity take it seriously, not as a metaphor, not as a philosophical position adopted for convenience, as the literal implication of the geometry they use every day to predict gravitational waves, to calculate satellite orbits, to describe the curvature of space-time around black holes. Think about what this means for a specific memory. The morning you sat at a kitchen table with someone you loved, the coffee, the light through the window, the sound of their voice saying something ordinary that you did not know you were memorizing. That morning is not a ghost. It is not a fading trace in neural tissue. In the block universe, that morning exists at its coordinates in the four-dimensional structure, as physically real as this moment. The light through the window is still falling at those coordinates. The coffee is still warm. The voice is still speaking. You cannot reach those coordinates from here because entropy has carried you forward and the geometry does not permit return. But the coordinates are occupied. The morning is there. I find this the most consequential implication of any physics result I have encountered, because it says something specific about death. If the block universe is the correct description of reality, then a life that has ended has not disappeared. It has become fixed, a four-dimensional object in space-time, complete, extending from its first coordinate to its last, as permanent as any feature of the geometry. The person is not gone in the way a fire goes out, extinguished, absent, nowhere. The person exists at every coordinate they ever occupied, at every moment they were alive, in a structure that does not delete what it contains. The universe does not erase the past. It moves forward in entropy, leaving the past exactly where it was. A human life in the block universe is a four-dimensional shape, extending roughly 70 or 80 years along the time dimension, occupying a complex path through the spatial dimensions as the body moved through the world. The shape has a beginning and an end. But the end does not erase the shape. A road that ends at a cliff does not cease to exist behind you. The road is still there, every mile of it, every curve, every stretch. You have reached the end of it. The road has not disappeared. A life is the same. The coordinates are occupied. The shape is complete. Death is the last coordinate, not the deletion of all the others. Gone from reach and gone from existence are not the same thing. That is the distinction Einstein was drawing in his letter to Besso's family. Besso had become unreachable. The present had moved beyond his coordinates, and entropy's arrow meant the living could not return to them. But the coordinates remained. The geometry had not changed. The structure that contained Besso's life had not collapsed or emptied. It was simply behind, in the same sense that a city you drove away from is behind you on the road. Still there, still real, still populated with the events that happened in it, just no longer accessible from where you are now. You have experienced a small version of this already. Every place you have left, the house you grew up in, the town you moved away from, the room where something important happened that you will never enter again. Those places still exist. The events that occurred in them feel gone because you have moved beyond them, because entropy has carried you forward and the distance grows. But the places are still at their coordinates on the Earth. The events are still at their coordinates in space-time. You feel their absence because you are here and they are there. The absence is real. The non-existence is not. Relativity extends this from space to time. The past is a place you have traveled away from. It is behind you. It is not erased. Strangeness deepens when you consider what relativity says about simultaneity. Two observers in different states of motion disagree about which events are happening at the same time. There is no universal present, no single slice across the four-dimensional block that every observer agrees constitutes now. This is not a philosophical position. It is a measured consequence of the geometry. If you and another observer are moving relative to each other, the set of events you each call simultaneous, the events you each place in your present moment, are different sets. Your now and their now do not align. An observer moving away from Earth at a significant fraction of the speed of light would calculate that events decades in Earth's past are simultaneous with their present. For that observer, at that velocity, what you experienced 30 years ago is happening now, is part of their present moment, as real and as current as whatever they are doing at this instant. This is confirmed by the same physics that keeps muons alive. Subatomic particles that should decay in microseconds but reach the Earth's surface because time runs slower at near light speed. Their now is different from our now. Both are physically valid. The present is not universal. It is observer-dependent. And if the present is observer-dependent, then the past, the thing you have been assuming is gone, is someone else's present. Moments you cannot return to. People who are no longer here. Those exist in a universe where another observer's perspective makes them present tense. Your past is not erased, it is located. And from certain vantage points in space-time, it is now. The loss is real. The goneness is a matter of position, not of existence. If the block universe is real, if the past exists as permanently as the present, then why does the past feel so completely gone? Why does loss feel like absence rather than distance? Why does death feel like deletion rather than separation? Why, when someone you love dies, does every cell in your body register it as a subtraction from the universe rather than a change in coordinates? Thermodynamics provides the answer. Memory exists because the brain records past states as physical changes to neural structure, synaptic weights, protein configurations, dendritic branching patterns. You remember the past and not the future because entropy means the past leaves traces and the future does not. A burned match leaves ash, a physical record of the fire that consumed it. An unburned match leaves no trace of the fire it will eventually become. An aging face records the passage of time in lines, in texture, in the accumulated marks of expression repeated across decades. A young face carries no record of the aging it will undergo. The traces all point backward because entropy's arrow points forward, from order to disorder, from concentrated energy to dispersed energy, leaving records as it goes. That is why you remember yesterday and not tomorrow. That is why grief accumulates and anticipation dissolves. The arrow you feel is entropy's arrow, not a property of time itself. What you experience as the direction of time, the absolute conviction that the past is gone and the future is coming, is entropy's direction, not time's direction. The fundamental physics has no arrow. Entropy has one. And your consciousness, which is a physical process running on a brain that obeys thermodynamics, experiences entropy's arrow as the direction of time. The past feels gone because entropy has moved beyond it. The records exist, but the process has moved on. The future feels unreal because entropy has not reached it yet. No records exist from coordinates. The process has not yet occupied. But the physics says both are equally real, equally present in the four-dimensional structure. The asymmetry is in the record keeping, not in the existence. Sit with that distinction for a moment. The past feels gone because of how your brain interfaces with entropy, because memory works in one direction and not the other, because traces accumulate behind you and not ahead of you. The feeling is real. The goneness it reports is not, or at least it is not the whole story. The goneness is what it feels like to move through a structure that does not move with you. The structure stays. You travel. Loss aches partly because the world moves irreversibly forward in entropy. There are traces everywhere, new traces no longer forming. The photographs in a drawer, the handwriting on an envelope you cannot throw away. The chair they sat in that still holds the shape of how they sat. The recording of their voice on a phone you will never delete. The way a room still smells faintly of them weeks after they are gone. Entropy left these traces as it moved through the coordinates where the person was alive. Each trace a record of a moment that existed, a physical imprint of a state, the universe occupied at those coordinates. Now entropy has moved beyond those coordinates, and no new traces are being laid down, no new photographs, no new handwriting, no new recordings. The accumulation has stopped, and the grief registers this as absence, as a person who is no longer here, who has been subtracted from the universe. The physics says they have not been subtracted. They are still at their coordinates. Every moment of their life exists in the block. Every morning, every conversation, every ordinary hour that neither of you thought to notice at the time. What has changed is not their existence, but your access. Entropy has carried you forward, and the distance between your current coordinates and theirs grows with every passing second. The gap feels like loss. The physics says it is distance. Now, what the physics cannot say. Eternalism, the full block, is the most natural reading of general relativity, but it is not the only interpretation physicists hold. Some defend a growing block model. The past is fixed, the future is genuinely open, and the present is the edge where new events are added to the structure. In this view, the past is real and permanent, but the future does not yet exist. Others defend presentism. Only the present moment exists, and the past and future are abstractions rather than real regions of space-time. The debate is unresolved. Serious physicists hold each view. The evidence from relativity favors eternalism, the full block. But the question is not settled, and claiming it is settled would be the kind of premature certainty this series does not offer. Notice, though, what even the growing block model says. The past is fixed. Even the interpretation that denies the reality of the future affirms the reality of the past. A life that has been lived in the growing block is permanently real, added to the structure, frozen at its coordinates, as fixed as stone. Only presentism denies this, and presentism has the hardest time accounting for the experimental evidence of relativity, where simultaneity is observer-dependent and the present is not universal. Across all interpretations, one thing is settled. Time is not what common sense assumes. It is not universal. It is not absolute. It does not flow at the same rate for everyone. It is not a river carrying events from future to past. It is a dimension, measurably, confirmably, to the precision of atomic clocks on aircraft and satellites in orbit. What the block universe cannot say is anything about experience. It describes the structure of events, their locations, their geometry, their permanence in the four-dimensional manifold. It does not describe what it is like to be inside those events. Whether the you at past coordinates experiences anything, whether there is something it is like to be your past self at those locations, whether consciousness persists at fixed coordinates or exists only at the moving edge of entropy, is a question. Physics does not have the tools to answer. It is the hard problem of consciousness wearing a space-time disguise. The block universe tells you the coordinates are occupied. It cannot tell you whether anyone is home. Here is the boundary, and it deserves the same respect as the boundary at t=0. The physics goes as far as it goes and then stops. It says your life exists permanently in the structure of space-time. It says death is a boundary in the time dimension, not an erasure from the structure. It says the past is as real as the present. And then it falls silent on the question that matters most, whether permanence in the structure carries experience, or whether experience is something that only happens at the moving edge where entropy is active and the present is being lived. What physics offers is something precise: the permanent existence of every moment of your life in the structure of space-time. Whether that matters, whether permanence without experience is meaningful, whether existence without access is consolation, depends on what you believe you are. A pattern of matter at coordinates, or the experience of being that pattern? Physics describes the pattern. Physics describes the pattern. It cannot yet describe the experience. But consider what the pattern contains. Every moment you have lived, the ones you remember and the ones you have forgotten, the ones that mattered and the ones that seem to matter not at all, exists at its coordinates. Your entire life is already written into the geometry, not in the future tense, as something that will be preserved after you die. In the present tense, as something that already exists as a complete four-dimensional shape in the structure of space-time. You are not building a life that will one day become fixed. You are extending a shape that is already permanent at every coordinate you have already occupied. The past portion of your life is already in the block, as fixed, as real, as permanent as anything in the universe. The question is only how far the shape extends before it reaches its final coordinate. Einstein wrote to Besso's family and reached for the only thing the physics he had spent his life building could offer. Not heaven, not reunion, not the promise that Besso was in a better place or that they would see him again. Just this: The distinction between past, present, and future is a stubbornly persistent illusion. Besso had become fixed, permanently located in the four-dimensional block, as real as any point in space, unreachable but not absent. Einstein wrote the letter knowing he would follow soon. He was 76 and in declining health. 5 weeks later, he did. And by the logic of his own physics, his coordinates in space-time are as fixed and as permanent as Besso's. Both men exist in the block, at their coordinates, at their moments, in the geometry that neither time nor entropy can erase. Those same equations that predict gravitational waves and correct GPS clocks describe a universe where the past does not disappear, where every ordinary morning of every ordinary life is written permanently into the geometry of what exists, every conversation, every meal shared, every hand held, every unremarkable Tuesday that felt like nothing at the time, and now, from the distance entropy has carried you, feels like everything, all of it at its coordinates, all of it in the structure, none of it erased. Whether experience persists at those coordinates is a question physics has not answered. But the coordinates exist. The universe does not delete what has happened in it. It moves forward in entropy, leaving the past exactly where it was, exactly as real, exactly as present as it ever was. The people you have lost are at their coordinates. Every moment of them, every version of them, from the first day you knew them to the last. The mornings are still mornings. The conversations are still happening at their locations in the block. The laughter has not stopped. It is simply located at coordinates you have moved beyond, just behind us now, receding at the speed of entropy. Still there.